Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by David Wolman. Just a two-man show today. Devin Hassan feeling a little under the weather, so David, you and I are here, and man, this is the last Friday that you'll have without a Texas high school football game to cover. How fired up are you right now, man?
The fire's been burning up since Sunday, since the NFL season started, but now, like, to realize that it's actually going to happen in a week from now, like the scrimmages that are taking place this week, the regular season starts next week. I mean, who would have thought like 3 or 4 months ago this would even happen?
I know. There was some, like, a nice sense of, a calming sense of normalcy on Sunday to have football back in our lives. Football just kind of snuck up on me this year because I've been so invested in the NBA playoffs, and it didn't even really dawn on me until, like, last week around, like, Tuesday or Wednesday that, oh, yeah, the NFL's coming back. But it was nice to just kind of sit down on a Sunday, just throw on CBS, watch the Pats, and just, it felt, there was a nice sense of normalcy to it all. And then next week we get to, obviously have that right back with a work capacity with our 5A, 6A season starting up. Then have you given any thought to what game you're going to cover to begin the season?
Yes, the game that I'm going to be covering to start the season is going to be Capella at Mesquite right there.
Okay.
Yeah, good game to start the year for Capella. I
was kind of going back and forth because forever it's always been the Tom Landry Classic that I've kicked my season off with, and going out to Eagle Stadium out in Allen to watch, whatever matchup they've got on the docket to begin their season. But with, I got a little bit more on my plate this year. Got a few more schools that I'm covering, so I might actually end up out at McKinney ISD Stadium for a couple games. I was thinking maybe Thursday, see McKinney Boyd play Flower Mound, and then on Friday, McKinney plays Plano in the first game of the Todd Ford era. So, and then, Allen has games against like Atascocita and Cedar Hill the following week. So some pretty high-profile matchups to check out there. But it's almost here, man. It is right around the corner. And as over the past few weeks, we've been, kind of building anticipation for that with our ongoing high school football season preview. We've, if you haven't been keeping track, we've come up with 20 questions to help preview the season. We've been discussing, 4 questions each week. We have knocked out 12, so we are down to, the penultimate episode of our season preview. So we got 4 more questions. So let's just dive right into them, David. Let's start and talk one of the most exciting aspects of high school sports, the rivalry game. Just the and who knows? Obviously, the atmosphere might make those look a little bit different this year, but nevertheless, the rivalry games are the ones that really tend to kind of galvanize community, and really, you can tell that those weeks around the practice facility, it means a little bit more to the kids when you have something at stake against your heated rivals. So let's talk about some rivalry games of note. Rivalry games. Which rivalry games do we think will have a little bit of extra heat to them this season?
Oh well, there's a lot of them this year. I have filled out one complete page right here, of rivalry games right there, and the one that stuck out to me is Frisco Lone Star against Frisco Independence.
Okay, that's a good one.
Look at Lone Star. They've already been in a state championship game. They made it all the way to the semifinals last year. Obviously no Marvin Mims this year, but they still have Rangel. They still have pretty good quartet of people coming back. And then obviously Frisco Independence, they're coming off one of probably their best season in program history right there. And, Braylon Braxton's still coming back at quarterback. And, they still got a lot of targets at wide receiver.
Lone Star Independence is a really good one. Lone Stars, they've been kind of the bell cow of the Frisco ISD football scene for some time. And Independence has been right kind of in that, looking to basically kind of make that leap. They've been right in that next tier, right below them, looking for that kind of that signature performance to put them on the level with a Lone Stars. So maybe Braylon Braxton's got enough in the tank to get him over the hump this year. That's certainly going to be a game that the Knights have circled for sure.
And that game's October 16th at the Ford Center.
Both of mine were. I'm actually not going to be in town for either of these games. Spoiler alert: I'm actually going to be out of town the week of Thanksgiving. So just letting you know that in advance.
Okay, heads up.
So yes, there's going to be games though on November 27th. Right during the Thanksgiving break. Actually, the unique wrinkle is that a lot of these games are going to take place during the afternoon because you're not married to your school schedule and whatnot. So a lot of teams have games scheduled that Friday at 2:00 in the afternoon, including the McKinney ISD Crosstown Showdown. Obviously, a very, very big game out McKinney ways between Boyd and McKinney, and that's you look at kind of what that rivalry has meant in recent years. Like for the longest time, it was just death taxes and Boyd just laying waste to McKinney. A very, very lopsided rivalry, at least on the football field. McKinney had its say in some other sports, but at least on the football field, Boyd controlled that rivalry for so long. And then over the last 3 years, kind of coupled with the last year of Jeff Smith's tenure at McKinney, you've noticed the Lions have really kind of turned the corner as far as just offering up more of a competitive fight in these district games. They qualified for the playoffs the last 3 seasons, and you've been able to see that competitiveness bear out in that game against Boyd. Last season, I believe they've won the last 2 under Marcus Schaefer since he came aboard.
How about that last game of the regular season,
exactly.
Right there, where not only they got a field goal out there, they have to get what was it, the Plano game?
It was, yes. It's also been nice that the way the schedule's worked out to where it's been on that last week of the season. So there's usually something at stake, relative to the playoff picture. And then last year, yes, it was McKinney walking off them. I think it was a walk-off or whatever, but it was a game-winning field goal by Seth Cox. I believe the score was only like 10-7 or something like that.
Very low-scoring game.
But nevertheless, that, though, coupled with Plano losing to Prosper that night, that clinched a playoff berth for McKinney. So, usually the proximity of the game helps as far as the stakes go. In this case, this year, it's the second to last week of the season. So, there's most likely going to be, if that District 5-6A, if it pans out the way that, I think most think, where you're going to have Allen and Denton Geyer going back and forth for those top 2 spots, probably Prosper slots into the number 3 seed, and then it's a coin flip between Braswell, McKinney, Boyd. Maybe if Little Elm catches a couple breaks, they could work their way into the mix. So it's, there's a chance that whether it's one team maybe playing for a playoff spot or just a simple playoff eliminator, something is likely to be on the line on November 27th against at McKinney ISD Stadium between Boyd and McKinney. What was another game that came to your mind as far as a rivalry game to look forward to?
I'm going to stick in the Frisco ISD.
All Frisco today.
I love Frisco. I'm actually going up there today for a volleyball match, so I'm sticking with Frisco today. Okay. One that's it's going to be renewed this year is going to be Frisco Reedy against Wakeland. Look at the success that Frisco Reedy had the last couple of years.
Yeah.
2 years ago, they're in the state quarterfinals right there. And then obviously Wakeland's always a playoff contender under Marty Secord over there. And obviously these 2 teams have actually played in 2016 and 2017.
Okay.
And both of them are really close games. And Wakeland won 19-14 and 16. And then the following year, Reedy won 35-28. So obviously, it's going to be a few years back, but those, the coaches are going to remind them how close those games were. So by the time that week comes up for those games right there, I'm pretty sure the kids are going to be fired up.
Over in District 6-6A, the Louisville ISD, Plano ISD Capel District, that same day as the Crosstown Showdown, I believe November 27th, that is also when, at least in my opinion, when the marquee game on the District 6-6A schedule takes place, and that is the annual Battle of the Axe. They actually play for a trophy in this one, but Louisville versus Marcus, one of the most storied rivalries in all of Louisville ISD athletics, and I don't know, if these 2 teams, if they live up to the expectations that we've kind of set for them as far as where they stack up in the 6-6A pecking order, if their talent plays to its paper, I think this has a chance to be a really, really exciting game. Last year's game itself was one of the most entertaining games on the district schedule. Marcus was able to gut it out in overtime, a 48-42 shootout, and then you look at the talent on the field that both teams have coming back, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You've got perhaps the 2 best quarterbacks in the district, the reigning district MVP, Garrett Nussmeyer, committed to LSU.
Yep.
Over at Marcus on Louisville, they've got Taylon Green, committed to Boise State. And then just the talent that they have surrounding them. Louisville has maybe the best 1-2 punch at wide receiver in the district with Armani Winfield. He's got a laundry list of FBS offers. Isaiah Stevens had an awesome season last year as a junior. They got Damian Martinez, the reigning district offensive newcomer of the year back at running back. He's only going to be a junior. And then with Marcus, it's with Nussmeyer, you have to obviously mention J. Michael Sturdivant, who we thought last week could potentially lead our entire coverage area in receiving yardage. He's committed to Cal. Dallas Dudley's another great receiver. There's just so much skill position talent on the field, so I could very well see a scenario where they match that shootout from last season and get another 90-point game. And much like McKinney and McKinney Boyd, the fact that this game is happening in the second to last week of the season, again, we'll see. This district's going to be pretty up and down. It's going to be pretty competitive, but there stands to reason that the district title could very well be on the line if these 2 teams play to their paper up to that point. So, the Battle of the Axe could be potentially one of the more anticipated iterations of that rivalry in some time. Did you have any others, or do we want to move on to the next question?
Well, you're sticking with District 6-6A. Capel against Marcus.
Sure, why not?
That was an overtime game last year as well, too.
Yeah.
I mean, not close to being that high-scoring game. It was only a 15-7 game last year, but, I mean, both of these teams, they got two good wide receivers. They got, obviously, Nussmeier, he's an LSU pledge, but Ryan Walker, excuse me, he's coming back for his first full year as a starter.
Yeah.
And he threw for less than 2,000 yards last year, but he got thrown into an injury situation last year.
He did begin the year as the starter, and he was kind of up and down as far as who was going to play, whether it was him or Kevin Schumann.
But I mean, you get like a whole off season with him now, and with Anthony Black's talents, and obviously KJ Liggins coming back to Capel, who has 5 Division I offers right there.
Yeah.
I mean, look at it. That could be a heck of a game right there.
Let's see. Let's pivot to, so in the last few weeks, obviously we've done some statistical questions talking about who's going to be our leading passer in our coverage area, leading rusher, leading receiver. We're going to go to the other side of the ball and talk about an entire unit. We're going to talk about which teams do we foresee having the best defenses in our coverage area this season. I had a few that came to mind. We can just kind of go back and forth.
Sure.
Allen always works its way into this discussion. And even though, I mean, at the start of the season, you're left with more questions about Allen's defense than perhaps any individual defense than any that we cover and whatnot, just because it feels like every year they're having to replace a massive senior class. And it's just, at this point, you just kind of give them the benefit of the doubt because they've shown that they can reload as seamlessly as anybody in the state when it comes to that. And this season is no different. They graduated 10 defensive starters from last season. I believe 9 of them made the all-district team, so some pretty awesome players that they had to part ways with. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then so, I mean, it's just it's just business as usual, though. I mean, again, because one of the things that Allen has in its favor every year is because of the nature of their games. Some of their games tend to be pretty lopsided, more times than not. Yep. So it gives those backups a lot of opportunities to get some reps there in the second half. And, I mean, by the end of the year, you've got backups that have already played a ton of reps. Allen already rotates their defensive linemen. They sub in a ton throughout normal games itself. So, I mean, a lot of these backups are not going to be unfamiliar with what it's like to play, high leverage varsity snaps. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, while they have just one returning starter in general, I believe Cade Patton over in the secondary, I mean, there's still a lot of talent that there's to be encouraged by. Just kind of looking at their track record. I mean, guys like some of the guys that could potentially step up and take on new roles. Isaiah Hullum, who actually was injured for actually a lot of his junior season, he's expected to be a standout on the defensive line. You look in the linebacking core with Levi Tupou, who's had a couple brothers come through the program. Really, really quality genes there at linebacker. Mm-hmm. Link Smith, Alexander Green in the secondary. He's got some college interest. Mm-hmm. Marshall Toussaint. I mean, there's it's Allen and the expectations that they're going to be pretty solid on that side of the ball. So again, you just kind of give them the benefit of the doubt at this point because they've shown that they can reload as seamlessly as any program in the state when it comes to that. I'm encouraged to see what Allen can do on defense. Plus, they always tend to start the year like in midseason form. It's jarring, because you begin the year with okay, Allen's got to replace this and that on defense, and then you get to that opener, and then they come out just guns blazing. There's they don't miss a step whatsoever. It's so impressive how they continuously do that despite having to reload year in, year out. Let's see. How about you? What was one defense that stuck out to you?
Well, it's going to be within their same district out there. I actually chose Prosper.
Okay.
Prosper, I know this is based on last year, but they held 9 opponents under 20 points last year. Mm-hmm. And obviously, they're losing 5 defensive starters last year, but they returned 6 out of the 3-4 defense.
Yeah.
Looks like the strength of this team is going to be in the front 7 right there.
Yeah, their front 7's loaded.
Yeah. I mean, linebacker Aiden Ciano, is that his name?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, 138 tackles last year, 13 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 4 interceptions right there. I mean, just a stud right there, linebacker.
Yeah.
And Herman Lee right there as well, too. He had 6 tackles for loss and 4 interceptions last year. And James Eckroat.
Eckroat, up on the defensive line. Yep.
Defensive line, yep. 5 sacks, 16 tackles for loss. So, I mean, good luck trying to run on that team right there. So, just based on that and the the continuity that they're going to have up front right there, that's going to be a tough team to match up from against in the trenches.
I think John Paul II is also a team to watch out for on defense. John Paul was obviously one of the more impressive stories last season, with them having the best season in program history, advancing to this TAB state championship game, and it really kind of like they were able to check off a number of milestones throughout the year, snapping their long district losing streak and whatnot. And then in the playoffs, they had this performance, I believe in the second round, against Fort Worth Nolan, that was kind of the coming out party and like the holy crap, okay, this team's gone up a level moment. And I want to say it was something like 41-18. I don't have the score in front of me, but it was, it was a surprisingly lopsided performance. But I was most impressed, though, with the work that they did on defense, because Nolan has one of the best running backs in the entire state in Emeka Megwa, and it just felt like John Paul's defense really had, they just allowed next to no room for him or anybody on that offense to do anything of substance. And you look at all the talent that they have coming back. It was such a young defense last season, and they still were able to accomplish all that they did. And now all those guys are a year older, a year more experienced. Guys like Terrence Brooks, Cameron Robertson, Braxton Myers, Charles Daniels, all of whom are most likely going to be playing at the Division I level in college. It is just a who's who of just talented defensive players on that side of the ball. And, with the offense, the offense had its losses at quarterback and receiver with some late offseason transfers and whatnot. So that side of the ball is probably still going to be trying to kind of find its footing early in the year. So really expect John Paul to have to lean on that defense. And like I said, their talent is just absurd on that side of the ball this season. I also think Frisco Lone Star, as we were just talking kind of in that same vein as Allen, as far as a team that, that lost the majority of its starters, but their pedigree and their track record suggests that they should be all right. Frisco Lone Star last year was, one of the best defenses in the state. They allowed less than 16 points per game. And now, granted, they returned just 5 starters from last season. They graduated a handful of guys that are, went on to play Division I football. But you look at that linebacking core, especially right there in the center, and they are just, stocked with talent. Alessio Russolio was, I think he made our all-area team last year, maybe a second-team selection, but he was in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year, a first-team selection. He had just an outstanding season. Obviously Jalen Ford was kind of the anchor of that defense there in the middle, but he's since moved on to college. But Russolio's kind of set up to kind of be the heir apparent there at linebacker. Blake Gocher was an all-district selection. Ashen Janti was the newcomer of the year in that district last season. They've got so much talent there on defense. And again, it feels like every year when we have our all-area voting and we're having to talk, top assistant coaches in the area, it feels like Brian Murphy, when you see her, Darren Kite, the defensive coordinator at Lone Star, always comes up, always given consideration. I believe he's actually been the recipient of our assistant coach of the year award twice. It's just one of those units that you just kind of trust. They'll figure out a way to slot guys in that make it work. Let's see, any other defenses that come to mind for you?
I'm going to say Capel's defense.
Okay.
I know
they got a good linebacker.
Like Walker Polk?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He started since he was a freshman.
He was
unanimous, first team all-district last year.
Speaking of which, I think he was an all-area selection of ours back as a freshman. So, yeah, he's quite the real deal back there.
Yeah. I've even walked up to him. I'm new here and I'm meeting everybody, and just even when I see him on the baseball field, this kid looks like a linebacker out there with the way he's built. Mm-hmm. So. Obviously they got a pretty experienced secondary coming back there too. They got to kind of figure out the defensive line situation a little bit. But the back seven right there, they're going to have a good unit back there.
Okay. Last one that I put down, kind of sticking with Frisco ISD. Reedy. Keep an eye on Reedy's defense this season as they're making the move from Division II to Division I, obviously in a much, much tougher district. And
yes.
Making the playoffs is going to be no easy feat, but they do have a defense that returns 7 starters. They were solid last year, just around 23 points per game allowed. Mm-hmm. They did have a big loss in the middle with Will Harbor, who just did everything for them. Literally everything. He was a Wildcat quarterback. He was a linebacker. He handled special teams work as far as kicking goes. Again, you can't replace a talent like that who checks so many boxes for a team.
Nope.
But they still do have some capable guys there, especially in the middle, where Harbor last resided with Michael Swope, Brock Walland. They should be solid up front with Brooks Griffith, Hudson Halbert. You have Ryan Jones back. He's an all-district safety. Head coach Chad Cole really likes the foundation there as far as what they're building defensively. Thinks he has a chance to kind of get back to just the rhythm they had, a couple seasons prior when they had that historic run to, I believe, the 3rd, 4th round best season in program history. Really likes just kind of the chemistry chemistry and just the vibe of the defense right now. So that's a team that's kind of on my radar on the defensive side of the ball as well.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk a couple questions now. We're going to shift and talk a little bit of some stuff related to the pandemic. And unfortunately, these are going to be a couple doomsday questions.
No, nobody wants to hear this,
because these are a couple questions that people are going to have to brace for these throughout the season, because especially as we wade deeper into this, obviously there's plenty of question marks that come with playing a season during a global pandemic as is. But obviously everybody's been bracing for things like later on in the year. What happens if games start getting canceled? Because you've already seen this, with the smaller classifications, even though the overwhelming majority of them are getting played each week. It feels like 90-95% of the games are getting played. There are still a handful, though, that are slipping through the cracks because one campus has, a bit of a COVID problem, and the other school's just not comfortable playing and whatnot. So you've already had some games fall through the cracks. So I guess right now, so what is, from what you've at least heard from your districts, especially once we get into district play, because that's when, it's really, it takes on an extra, sense of gravity when you actually have district games that are getting canceled.
Sure.
What happens if these district games start falling through the cracks there?
Well, what happens is that each district's going to fall back on some policies that they voted on right there. I was actually in contact with Coach Young, Michael Young from Lake Dallas, and he sent me an email today just regarding some of the changes that have been made, and they've even talked about what happens if there's even a statewide shutdown from this pandemic here. So one thing that he mentioned in his email is that in case there's a shutdown right there, they're going to do everything they can to resume play at the next available date. Whether that means 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Until the time district certification comes around. And whenever they do resume, God forbid that ever happens, where everything's completely shut down. I mean, I want everybody to play every week. I mean, so do these kids right here.
For sure.
What will happen if that's the case? They're going to play every 5 days until that schedule's completely made up right there.
Okay. There was because all these decisions are left up to the district executive committees. There's no one policy that was handed down by the OL on what to do.
Now, 668, you were discussing with me before the podcast started.
Yeah, it's going to kind of be a case by case scenario as far as each district's procedures, as far as what to do in the event that district games are canceled.
Yep.
In the case of District 66A, which we mentioned earlier, just as an example, again, let's just say that you have a case where, let's say we're down to the second to last week of the season or whatever. You got two teams that are tied 3-3 in the district standings. Let's say it's, Louisville and Marcus, who we just mentioned earlier, could be playing for the district title. Well, let's say that game doesn't happen. Let's say that the pandemic rears its ugly head and that game falls through the cracks. One of the schools has to, I don't want to say forfeit because, then they're unable to play or whatnot. So, first off, I think one of the consistent lines of logic is that if teams have to forfeit, from what I've been hearing, is that it's not going to count against their record. Okay. So you're going to have to then fall back on some sort of tiebreaker, though. And I guess in the example of 668, if you have two teams that are tied and you have a game, they're not able to settle it head-to-head, which is obviously the first tiebreaker that you go to when deciding how to snap a tiebreaker, it would simply then be you would look at a point differential based on common opponents is something that could, obviously play into how how teams like in 668 or potentially a different district, how they settle a tiebreaker that is impacted by the pandemic. Because that's the thing, every district is bracing for the possibility that this might happen. You had some that have just completely had to revamp the structure and alignment of their district schedule. Within District 668, it sounds like at their meeting there were kind of some contrasting schools of thought as to how to approach structuring the district schedule, but ultimately they decided that, just for the sake of, these kids and everybody has worked so hard to get to this point, let's reward them with trying to get on a full 10-game schedule and just do what we can there. And they'll just have to kind of cross the bridges as they come, because I don't know what your expectations are as far as how seamless a road this is going to be, if there's going to be any bumps, if they have to invoke any of these tiebreakers at any point. But it's just going to be on pins and needles as we get deeper and deeper into the season, as far as just what's going to happen as far as the actual makeup of these districts if you do have to start canceling games and whatnot. So that leads then. It's a nice segue then to the last question, because this is, I think, at the end of the day, just the albatross that's kind of hanging over this whole thing this season. As we get further and further into this, as we try to make it through the pandemic season, will the 2020 football season be completed?
That is the big question. That is the big elephant in the room right there.
We've been, I think back to when this first started, and we were having discussions on how long we thought this would all last, how long we thought the ramifications with regards to high school sports would last, and we're still at a point where I don't think anyone really knows the answer, and that's the thing.
No.
It's such a fool's errand to pin yourself down on one side of the fence versus the other. But I mean, at the end of the day, just off of I don't know, just from what you've been able to kind of the information you've been able to gather just over the months during this pandemic, what we know about where this thing could be going. What do you think the chances are that we actually get to the end of the road and are able to crown state championships and all that good stuff?
No pressure on this question at all whatsoever, right?
Not at all.
Well, for me, I'm one of those people who tries to put myself in other people's shoes right here.
Okay.
And for me, I'm trying to put myself in the UIL shoes right here. Mm-hmm. And number one, high schools, football is their big money maker right there.
Absolutely.
And whenever you look at it, think about how many people the state championships draw. Mm-hmm. I was looking just online right now, and last year for the Duncanville North Galena, the Galena
Park North Shore.
Yeah, that game drew almost 48,000 fans.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if it's going to draw 48,000 fans this year because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Hopefully the pandemic is over with by that time. But I mean, high school football is way too important. I think they're going to try to do everything possible to make sure there's a season, even if it goes into sometime next year. Mm-hmm. Because, number one, they realize how important it is to some of these players out there. They work so hard for this moment right here to be on the stage at AT&T Stadium right there. And they've already given guidance about, how to handle the situation, as far as social distancing, as far as the scheduling of the season right there. So even if there's going to be some bumps along the road right here, even if there's going to be some canceled games or postponed games, I think there's going to be a season. I think it might be stretched out a little bit longer than what they're anticipating, but I think they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that we're going to have a full season.
Because I believe as of now, the state championships would take place in early to mid-January, I think is what I recall seeing the projected date for. Because that's kind of the million-dollar question is, so we just talked about for what happens if district games get canceled and how do you, and right now early on in the preseason, it's pretty simple because, if you have a team that loses a non-district game, odds are there's probably another team within a respectable driving distance that's going through the same thing. So you've had some teams where you have one game fall through and then 12 hours later you got a brand new opponent set up. Mm-hmm. So it's all fine and well in non-district. And again, you're going to have to probably, you might have to invoke some tiebreakers or some really unorthodox procedures as far as getting your 4 playoff teams if you have district games that get canceled. But you're not going to be afforded that in the playoffs because you can't call upon a tiebreaker to determine who advances in a playoff matchup. And that's kind of that's going to kind of be the bumpy road that you have to walk now is can you make it 6 weeks? There's 6 rounds of the playoffs in high school football. Can you make it 6 weeks without any issues? What happens if you get to the state quarterfinals and you have a team that has an outbreak or whatever, or just something or something virus related, and they've got you would hate to imagine a scenario you have a team that gets that far, that close, and they have to bow out because of the pandemic and whatnot. So I don't know. It's, like I said, it's impossible because also, we kind of don't know what's going to happen in a few months when flu season hits. And that's kind of been from what I've just based on what you've been hearing as far as, from health experts, as far as kind of the next big hurdle that we're all going to have to cross as a country. And that's how much because it does feel like the numbers are starting to kind of trend down. I'm not seeing the updates as, every day as frequently on social media as I had been, but it does sound like the general vibe is that the case numbers are down from what they used to be. But what happens when flu season hits? And that's something that can last for, months, 3-4 months from November on into February and whatnot. So how's that going to impact things? Is that going to, I don't know. It's so tough to pin down because, again, we don't know what the ramifications are right now. We don't know. Maybe everything does go smooth. It is smooth sailing, and we get through this unscathed, and teams are resourceful enough and smart enough, and they're able to take the necessary steps to, minimize. If you have a kid here and there that comes down with the virus, you can get it, him isolated and whatnot, and not have to worry about, an entire outbreak within the team and all that. But it's, I don't know. I just think that the prospect of going an entire postseason without any hiccups, that just seems a tad optimistic. But you did mention the prospect of them being able to move it back. But at some point, though, you reach a point of no return because eventually it's going to start, if you push it back too far, it's then going to start overlapping with other sports and all that. It just, I don't know. It could lead to a pretty chaotic scenario if we don't get a resolution too soon. But I don't know. I just part of me is a little like I want to believe the best. Obviously I hope everybody's able to get through their entire seasons unscathed and whatnot. But part of me is just kind of thinking like, okay, well, what are the odds that we get through a full 6-week stretch right in the middle of flu season without any issues? And that it seems a tad optimistic.
And unfortunately, high school sports, like the pros, you can't enact a bubble situation at all. No,
you can't. So, but yeah, again, I don't pin myself down on one side of the fence or the other because as we've learned, just in reporting about this, since everything kind of ramped up back in March, I mean that everything is so fluid and ever evolving and the story can change, on a whim. So who knows? I mean, it's, again, nobody knows for certain. So obviously, we're not any sort of high authority when it comes to dictating whether or not high school football season takes place. It's just a hunch, nothing more than that.
I would say that, how long has this pandemic going on since March?
Yeah.
It's already been 6 months.
Yeah.
At first.
It is crazy, though, when you just think, in hindsight, how long, we've been doing all this stuff for half a year.
Half a year. And that leads to maybe one positive out of this situation is that, we're learning how to deal with this virus, we're learning how to live with it. And obviously, number one, the cases have gone down quite a bit. And obviously, people have come to the realization, this is what we got to do to protect ourselves to make sure we don't get the virus. Wear a mask, making sure you're washing your hands as much as possible.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, it should all be second nature by this point. When you do anything for 6 straight months, it should be second nature. So, yeah, fingers crossed that it doesn't impede the progress of high school football season too much. We'll find out because it all fires up next week as far as the big ones, the big schools and whatnot. So, yeah, we'll see. We are almost there at the and out of the starting blocks.
You excited, Matt?
I am. It's just to see how it goes. This is the most unique, unorthodox season and just for general high school sports coverage that I think either of us will end up going through. So I'm just fascinated just to be along for the ride and see just what happens.
And we're very fortunate that all these schools and the IOL still giving us access to these stadiums right here and being able to allow us to capture it firsthand.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's good that they're also allowing the fans just in case they're still worried about going to a stadium that they're able to watch it online. So that's obviously a good thing.
Absolutely. So yes, that is at least 4 more questions on the docket in our penultimate episode of our ongoing high school football season preview.
4 to go.
We got 1 more episode left, and we'll be back next week, and we will close things out. And yeah, man, we are almost there. So yes, that'll be it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Appreciate you for checking this out. Like I said, we'll be back next week, probably on Monday. But nevertheless, folks, until then, you take care. We will talk to y'all later.